I am still losing my voice, as you can tell, but getting better every single day. And so I wanted to just do a quick video today on this article. It's actually another NBC News article, and I have my notebook here, so don't mind. I might be looking off screen a little bit. I just don't have a fancy setup, and so I don't have like a teleprompter or a screen behind me or anything like that. And my memory is good, but it's not great. So the article is titled Crib Videos Offer Clue to Mysterious Child Deaths Showing Seizure May Play a Role. And I thought this was really interesting because of a few reasons. So number one, we usually think of SIDS, not sudden unexplained death in childhood. And although they're basically the same thing, these sudden unexplained deaths in childhood occur in children over 1 year old. And that wasn't something that I had heard too much about before even reading this article. The second thing that I found was kind of, interesting about this article was that these are actually, kind of similar phenomenons from what it seems like, but they had never really connected them to seizure before. And so this article is talking about a small study, which I don't know the exact number of participants, but they did talk about at least 5 children who they were able to watch the videos of them before they passed away. Like they had a crib camera and they did see seizure-like activity. And it sounds like there was a 6th one that, from whatever they found, it sounded like it was the case also. So this actually does make a lot of sense, and we'll kind of get to that as the video goes on. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the facts. So I already told you guys this, but sudden unexplained childhood death occurs in children over 1 year old, but it's basically the same thing as SIDS. And this affects up to about 400 children in the US per year, and about 250 of those are children from age 1 to age 4. And the majority of these do happen while the child's sleeping. So there is actually a tenfold association between febrile seizures, history of febrile seizures, and this sudden unexplained death in childhood. Children in the US are also at risk for febrile seizures. Between 2 and 5% of the population of children will experience one of these febrile seizures. And these seizures typically occur between 6 months and 5 years old. And having them or having a history of them actually increases the chance or the risk of this person having like a actual seizure disorder moving forward in their life. According to the CDC website, which this wasn't part of the article, but I looked up additional facts and everything to bring you guys some more information. And MMR and MMRV, according to the CDC website, actually have a slight or a small increase in risk of this febrile seizures. And interestingly enough, they do admit to this on their website. Okay, so what are seizures? We're going to talk a little bit about what are seizures and then some of the issues and everything there. So really quick, and then we'll talk about this more in depth in a minute. But seizures are actually, if you look at the brain pathophysiology of what's actually happening to a person that has a seizure, they have an imbalance going on between inhibitory GABA and excitatory glutamate neurotransmitters in the brain that causes overexcitation, and that is what leads to the seizure. So seizures can be increased, based on fever, which we already talked about, decreased blood sugar, use of alcohol, withdrawal from medications or drugs, head injury. And something else I want you all to keep in mind is that certain medications lower the seizure threshold. So some of these medications can be certain antibiotics, certain antipsychotics, certain SSRIs, and even there is some effect seen from certain like opiates and pain medications. So moving backwards, we're going to talk again a little bit about this GABA-Glutamate thing, because I think it's important and it ties a lot of issues together, which you might not know are related, but you might feel like are related. So the imbalance between GABA and glutamate is actually also present in the same, in the same way where GABA would be lower, glutamate would be higher, in autism, Alzheimer's, encephalitis, seizures, which we already talked about, and even aluminum encephalitis, which I thought was really interesting, given the fact that we know aluminum is a commonly used adjuvant in certain vaccinations. So the imbalance between GABA and glutamate is mostly mediated by an enzyme called GAD, and GAD is glutamate acid decarboxylase, which actually converts the glutamate into the GABA. So that is the excitatory neurotransmitter and converts it into this inhibitory neurotransmitter. This happens in two different locations, one in the CNS and the second is in the pancreas, the beta islet cells of the pancreas, which is so interesting because, as we'll talk about in a minute, there's actually a relationship there with autoimmune mediated diabetes. So we can either have two different issues, usually whenever we have a problem with a enzyme or specifically like a chemical reaction in the body. And that is that sometimes there's just not enough of a rate limiting step to carry out the process or even to create that enzyme. Or in this case, there is also the occurrence of autoantibodies, which can happen kind of frequently, where the person is not going to be able to make enough of that enzyme because there's actually antibodies like attacking it, which is so interesting. And this actually plays a role along with other antibodies in type 1 diabetes and other autoimmune related diabetes. So something else that I thought was interesting, because whenever I go looking for a rate limiting step or a nutritional deficiency that could be present in an issue of something like this where a chemical reaction is not being carried out properly, I did find that vitamin D deficiency is actually a huge factor for development of type 1 diabetes, and it does play a role in these GAD related autoantibodies. So that's pretty interesting. Vitamin D levels, super important. You always want to make sure you're getting good levels of vitamin D from the actual sun. And in the winter, I personally think the best routes for administrating like a supplemental form of vitamin D would be the most natural thing, which would be fish oil, krill oil, or other fatty fish intake. So something kind of interesting about seizure cessation is that, as we know, the GABA is downregulated, the glutamate is upregulated, which is causing this excitatory reaction without enough inhibition. And there's actually an entire side situation going on with prolactin, which is pretty interesting. And I think I'm going to later try to do a whole video on that. But I'm not going to get into it too much in this video because it's kind of long and it's a little bit confusing to explain. So things that we need to think about when it comes to this GABA-glutamate imbalance, we can either have, like I said, some type of nutritional deficiency, or there could be inflammation or autoantibodies that could be causing a disruption in the production of GAD that's not allowing, this glutamate to GABA conversion. So things that we can think about specifically to try to make this better would be nutrients. We want to replete our nutrients, make sure that we are getting enough different types of foods that would have all of the vitamins and minerals and everything that we need for our body to function correctly. This could be protective for all those issues that I talked about. Seizures, could be protective for autism, Alzheimer's, could help a person who is recovering from encephalitis. Basically, it's going to be helpful to everybody because we probably all have disruptions in some type of, nutrient intake or reaction in our body. When we supplement vitamins, we're definitely going to want to get the most natural form of vitamin possible. So it's super important to make sure that you are getting a bioidentical or a natural form of a vitamin. You don't want folic acid, for example. You're going to want actual folate. And like I talked about with a vitamin D, because vitamin D is super important, you're going to want to get vitamin D from the sun as much as possible, and then use a natural form of supplement if you have to, especially in the winter, from things like fish oil, fatty fish, krill oil. Getting enough exercise, super important. You want to get enough exercise in the right amounts, but not so much that you skew your body to being in a stress response, having too much cortisol. So I like to say 3 to 4 strength training workouts per week. They don't need to be more than an hour. And 2 or 3 cardio sessions, 20 or 30 minutes, or you can count steps throughout the week also. You're definitely going to want to live in line with your circadian rhythm. That's going to balance a ton of hormones, including these systems I talked about here. You're going to want to go to sleep when it gets dark, so earlier in the winter and a little bit later in the summer, but always before 11, and stay asleep until after 5 a.m. Try to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep. You want to wake up after 5 a.m. because you want to allow that cortisol in the morning to spike naturally, the melatonin to fall, and for you to wake up in line with your circadian rhythm. You're going to want to avoid things that would lower the seizure threshold, or medications, different things that would inhibit GABA, because that could set you up for all kinds of issues like we had talked about. You're also going to want to calm inflammation in the body, eating an anti-inflammatory diet, being mindful, and you can even do things like chamomile tea in the evening. And I know a lot of these suggestions I made are not necessarily going to apply to young babies and toddlers, but children can always have good nutrition, and you can look at avoiding anything that might stimulate an issue. You can talk to your doctor, obviously, about febrile seizures, the risks associated, and try to mitigate things like that. But I hope you have found this article helpful and this video helpful. My main take home with these videos is to get you to see that the body is not, one problem, one response. It's actually, one problem can cause a myriad of issues, and it often does. Sometimes just one is what we happen to see first, or they express differently in different people. But we can always benefit by treating the whole body as a system and making sure that we're reducing inflammation, because it's the root of most issues that we have, balancing hormones because that goes hand in hand, and making sure we have enough of the correct nutrition to prevent deficiencies and make sure our body has everything it needs to function correctly. Like I said, I hope you all found this video helpful, and I hope you all have a beautiful day. I'm going to be back hopefully tomorrow with kind of a more, interesting article that is not going to be as in-depth as today. But I'm going to explain to you a little bit tomorrow about how the mainstream media tries to manipulate you and scare you with health news. So have a wonderful weekend, and I will be back soon.